William Edward Bougainville Du Bois was an African-American historian, sociologist, writer, and keen civil rights activist. In 1895, he became the first black man to graduate with a PhD from Harvard University. Shortly after, he became professor of history, sociology, and economics at Atlanta University. Du Bois was fortunate to grow up in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, in a small town with a comparatively integrated community, where many of the members of his church, the Society of the Congregational Church of Great Barrington, donated funds for his university costs. In 1885, when he moved to Nashville, Tennessee to attend Fisk University, Du Bois was confronted with American racism as epitomized through the Jim Crow laws, which were state laws in the former Confederate States of America that openly enforced racial segregation, where black and white people were required to use separate public facilities. These were made worse by the fact that those available to black people were consistently underfunded and poorly available. Du Bois struggled greatly with the issue of racial segregation and fought for equality for the African diaspora. He was also greatly disturbed by the continued legalization of racism through agreements such as the Atlanta Compromise, which depicted that Southern black people should live, learn, and work under white political rule and be content to be second-class citizens who were offered only vocational trainings as opposed to opportunities in further education or political office. In response, he argued that the Atlanta Compromise was against the 14th Amendment and should therefore not be supported in any state, insisting that we will not be satisfied to take one jot or tittle less than our full manhood rights. Unlike Washington, who believed in educating people in practical fields such as industrial education, Du Bois was an advocate for the education of black people in the liberal traditions. In response to the controversial Atlanta Compromise negotiated by Booker Washington, Du Bois and a number of other civil rights activists and prominent African American leaders set up the Niagara Movement, which looked to address the challenges faced by black people in the United States, but most especially in the southern states. The Niagara Movement included a Pan-African department, a suffrage department, and among others, a civil rights department. The movement, which was set up in 1905, unfortunately collapsed in 1909 due to limited resources and internal conflict. What followed in 1909, however, was the NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which produced a monthly magazine called The Crisis. The Crisis served as a source of information and pride for African Americans and also published numerous young African American writers. Named after Lowell's poem The Present Crisis, the Crisis magazine used its platform to promote racial equality and fight for black civil rights. Du Bois explained that the object of the publication was to show the facts and arguments which prove the dangers of racial prejudice. As director of publicity and research, editor of The Crisis, and a member of the board of directors, Du Bois played a huge part in the global Pan-African movement from his corner of the United States, encouraging African unity and strength against oppression. The NAACP was the leading American protest organization against lynching in the 1920s, and they also used the 14th Amendment successfully to declare a certain law which required black people in Louisville to live in a certain part of town unconstitutional. They also won a case at the Supreme Court which meant that black people could now do jury duty. In 1934, however, Du Bois resigned from the NAACP board as well as from the Crisis because of his advocacy of an African American nationalist strategy, which included African American controlled institutions, schools, and economic cooperatives, which opposed the NAACP's commitment to integration. At the first Pan-African Congress in 1900, which Du Bois helped organize, he said in his address to the nations of the world, "We, the men and women of Africa, in this World Congress assembled, do now solemnly appeal, let the world take no backward step in that slow but sure progress which has successfully refused to let the spirit of class, of caste, of privilege, or of birth debar from life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness a striving human soul. Let no color or race be a feature of distinction between white and black men, regardless of worth or ability." He then went on to ask the United States and the imperial European nations to acknowledge and protect the rights of people of African descent, and to respect the integrity and independence of the free states of Abyssinia, Liberia, and Haiti. He also insisted that black subjects of all nations should take courage, strive ceaselessly, and fight bravely so that they could prove to the world their incontestable right to be counted among the great brotherhood of mankind. Over the next few decades, Du Bois continued to attend Pan-African congresses around the world in 1919, 1921, 1923, and 1927. The delegations comprised intellectuals from Africa, the West Indies, and the United States. Yet although resolutions condemning colonialism and calling for the alleviation of the oppression of Africans were passed, little concrete action was taken. At the Fifth Congress in 1945, Du Bois was elected chairman, but the power was clearly in the hands of younger activists, such as George Padmore and Kwame Nkrumah, who later became significant in the independence movements of their respective countries. But Du Bois is perhaps the most well-known African-American civil rights activist of his generation, can be argued to have made a significant difference by attending the Congress and by serving as a source of inspiration for the activists who came after him. Pan-Africanism is a movement that encourages the solidarity of Africans worldwide. It is based on the belief that unity is vital to economic, social, and political progress and aims to unify and uplift people of African descent. Using this argument, it is clear that Du Bois's efforts to encourage, uplift, and unify African Americans through Pan-African congresses, the NAACP, the Crisis, and the Niagara Movement was vital towards the Pan-African movement. Du Bois's final Pan-African gesture was to take up citizenship in Ghana in 1961 at the request of President Kwame Nkrumah to begin work as director of the Encyclopedia Africana. His most important contribution towards Pan-Africanism was his writing. Du Bois wrote 21 books, edited 15 more, and published over 100 essays and articles. In the period before 1930, he helped found the Niagara Movement, the NAACP, and the Pan-African Congresses, which began in 1900. Du Bois was undoubtedly one of the most influential African-American civil rights activists and Pan-Africanists, and his contributions towards the movement, although often undermined by later movements, cannot be forgotten because Du Bois's contributions set the stage for further change.